Hi, so on November 1st, 2001, my great grandmother passed away. She was killed in a car accident, and at the time I was only 8 years old, so I don't think I really understood what exactly was happening. I know in the lecture it says 5 years old and under thinks it's kind of like a temporary thing. I don't think I thought that. I don't know what I really thought, to be honest, but there are just certain things that will always remind me of her and that day in general. And one of those is the food that I would always eat at her house. Um, so when I would go to her house after school, she would always fix me Vienna sausages right out of the can, not even heat them up or anything, and then sour cream and onion potato chips, and then York peppermint patties, which is probably the most weird, like the weirdest combination of food ever. So that always makes me think of her. And then at her house, she had a wicker chair that she would sit in, and so I always just remember her being in that one specific chair, and she would watch Mr. Rogers with me on PBS. But so about that day in general, so it was on November 1st. The day before was Halloween, October 31st, and I had just been at her house. I had dressed up as Minnie Mouse, and I went over there to trick or treat at her house, and everything was fine. We took pictures. Everything was completely fine, normal. The next day, I was with my grandma at the mall, and we had just eaten at Chick-fil-A. We were walking towards the car to leave, and my mom calls my grandma, and she just starts crying, and I was like, I remember being really confused. I didn't know what was going on, and she said, "Is everything going to be okay? Is it okay?" And she hung up the phone, and she just started crying, and she took my hand, and we took off running through the mall. And she said, "We're going to the hospital. Mom has been in a car accident." And so we took off running, got to the car. My mom worked at the hospital, so she was already there. And I just remember us getting there, and my mom came out of the doors and she was crying, and she didn't say anything. She just shook her head. She was crying and never said a word. And then my grandma just let out like this wailing cry, and I knew that just meant it wasn't okay. Like, not everything was okay. And in hindsight, it's weird to me that at 8 years old I understood that nonverbal communication, that it wasn't okay. And so she didn't even have to say that she had passed, and I still knew. But considering my age of the accident, I said I was 8 years old. I don't think I went through like the numbness or yearning stage of grieving, of the 4 steps, just because I remember crying, but I think it was more so because I saw other people crying. I don't think it was because I knew what was going on exactly. But the third stage, the disorganization stage, I think I did go through that because we would go to her house and she was no longer there. So I remember being really confused about that. But the kicker for me, like with coping and getting better, was the 4th stage of reorganization. And that was when my grandma sat me down and said, Mama's not going to be here anymore, but she misses you already, and you're going to see her again in heaven, so just know you'll see her again, and she already misses you. But the worst part about it, I think, was knowing that it may have been preventable, and obviously it was really sudden. We didn't expect that at all. She was in perfect health, lived by herself, but she was going to the beauty shop to get her hair done, which she did every week, and usually my grandma drove her there, which, I mean, she could drive herself, but usually Nana drove her, but for some reason today that she didn't, because I was with her. I don't know, I don't really know why, but she was leaving her house, pulling out onto the main road, and pulled right out in front of a tractor trailer and died before we got to the hospital. So in hindsight, my age, I think, had a huge effect on it, of not knowing exactly what to expect, what was going on. The suddenness of the accident was really tough, and the fact that in a way we think it could have been preventable just because usually my grandma drove her to the hair appointment. It's odd that she didn't do it that day. But we are coping well. Things that still remind me of the accident are that intersection where she had the accident. I see it a lot, so that's still rough, but it's better now. It's been a while.